Okay, so it's 9 o'clock. Darling, can you hear me? We'll go with that. Okay, cool. So if it's going to be a one-person show, it's going to be a one-person show. I guess everybody else can catch the recording. Let me screen share. Screen one. Go live. Yeah, not a problem, not a problem. Today, fingers crossed, today's actually going to be pretty short because I'm not going to have you guys doing too many things. Um, so technically I have you guys do a couple different things with DOS input, but because DOS is kind of an unwieldy beast that could technically brick your system, and I don't want to have to make you guys download like DOSBox, I'm gonna have you do one simple thing that should under no circumstances ever even begin to brick your systems. So yeah, so we should be short today. Um, so yeah, so good morning, other people. Again, I apologize that this class is so early. I know nobody likes being this early. Like it's a Saturday. It's a Saturday, and in an ideal world, nobody wants to be up this early. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, today we are talking about, like I said in the chat, we're talking about DOS scripting, scripting in general, project management tools and development styles, learning a new language, kind of a mishmash of things. So, with that said, let's go ahead and get right in that. So, if you're wanting to follow along, we're just going to be going straight through this kind of stuff. So, we're going to go to project management tools and development style, or, join the stream and you can see it. So, you guys talked about some different project management tools, and the hilarious thing is that you guys pretty much all talked about the same ones. And I'm assuming that's because they were things that you were introduced to in other classes, like game testing with Jira, and a few different places like level design, unless you had me with Unity Collab. Uh, I am so glad that you all have had wonderful experiences with Unity Collab. I think it is pure trash and I hate it. So that is my opinion on that. But I am glad that people have positive experiences with it. Um, Although Unity may be getting rid of it because they just bought out another company that's kind of their thing, is that they do kind of that kind of collab kind of work. So they may be getting rid of Unity Collab in favor of this other program because of that. You guys talked about Trello, you talked about Hack and Plan. Trello and Hack and Plan are based off of the same principles. Hack and Plan is just, it's geared towards game developers. It isn't always, like some of you said, it isn't always the easiest thing to just like get in and go, but once you start actually using it, Hack and Plan can be great. I can show you guys. I mean, it's gonna be embarrassing because our sprints are all way overdue because we have a weird way of starting to use Hack and Plan and then going off script. So let's see, are you with that one or are you with the other one? But so Hack and Plan, for those who have never seen, yeah, we're 25 days overdue on this one. For those of you who have never seen what Hack and Plan looks like, dashboards, my dashboard. Hack and Plan looks like this. Let me find one that's actually a better option as far as things. This one. So Hack and Plan actually has all this stuff pre-built in for you. So it talks about what all you need to do. And then it lets you... Oh, this isn't even the one I wanted to show. Let's try the other one. Let's see, this one maybe. But what it also does is it lets you actually go in and say, hey, what's actually, like, how much have I done, what have I done, what kind of what sprints have I met, what sprints haven't I met, how long did things take me, so you can measure the hours, so you can see whether you're over budget or under budget, because you can actually budget things out if you're that kind of person. Um, so Hack and Plan is really cool because it is kind of garnered to game developers. It even has like a metrics thing, and so you can see how many hours, how much work items, who's done what, the item distribution. You can see. So this is for my studio. I do the art, and I'm really religious about using whatever we're using, whether we're using Trello or Hack and Plan or GitHub cards or whatever we're using at that day. So all of these are green, and that's because I do lots of stuff. But Hack and Plan is really good, and it's kind of a souped up Trello. So if Trello works for you, 100% stick with Trello. Jira, a lot of you guys talked about how you've never seen Jira, or I don't have it on here, but Jira is awesome. Jira is amazing. Jira is great. Um, it is a good program to learn. It is industry standard for bug tracking, um, to the point that even Disney uses it for their bug tracking for their Facebook games. So, you know, uh, that says something. Um, some of you talked about a few different things like scrums and agile development, things like that, and scrums. One of you mentioned the idea that agile and scrums, like scrumming in general, is only effective if you're working well and collaborating with people, and that can be true, but it can also work pretty well when you have huge disagreements with your team, because it kind of forces them out into the open. Like, there's no way to ignore them. So, it actually kind of can do the opposite. Like, it can bring a team closer together when you have those disagreements, because there's always, at least, even though it is the most obvious disagreement in the entire office, there's always one person that is completely oblivious to it. And when you're actually standing up and doing scrums, um, sometimes like that's the only way they find out, and then for whatever reason they're like the one person who can actually solve the problem. So those are some of the tools that you guys talked about. There's a bunch of other ones. I mean, you guys could have gone with the simple like GitHub, or some of you did like post-it notes, whiteboards. Like, there's a lot of things, and it just depends on who your project manager is, how old school, how new school they are, what kind of style they're following, all that jazz. So let's get into it. So project development methods, though. Um, Different projects benefit from different methodologies. So this is going to talk a lot about kind of like the development styles. And so, yeah. So this is going to be another thing. Sometimes your company will set what it's going to be, whether it's going to be agile or waterfall or iterative or whatever. Sometimes it's up to the project manager. Sometimes it's up to the team. Sometimes it's some sort of mishmash of all of them together. Um, yeah, not every style of project management works for every project. Like, that's 100% a really like key point there. Um, that being said, you're probably going to find one or two that you really like and you really understand, and those are the ones that you're going to try and do like as much as you can. But try and at least have an understanding of how the other ones work, only because you will end up in a job that's like, hey, so we work in the waterfall, and you're like, I have no idea what that means. So just kind of try and, or at least be good enough to Google it when somebody says it, or when you go to a job interview. At this point, you've heard about it because we're going through this document, and they're like, so have you worked in, or do you know what the waterfall blah 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 blah, or traditional or blah blah blah, or, and you can say, oh yeah, I went through that, and as long as they don't ask follow-up questions, you 100% can turn around, go home, and Google it. So, it's the same way for those of you who are artists, and are wanting to like make a go at it with the art stuff. If they say, oh, do you have experience in Unreal? If you've taken design and creation of games, then yeah, you can say, yeah, I have experience with Unreal. You may not remember a single thing about Unreal, but you can 100% say, yes, I have experience with it. And then generally what happens after your interview, you don't do your art test like right away. A lot of times it's like a week or two for you to kind of like prepare, and then to make sure that they want to actually give you the art test. So you have those 2 weeks to literally crash course Unreal. For those of you who are more on the coding side, that's the same thing with like a language. Like maybe you've been doing C++ for years, and suddenly you get a job and they're like, yeah, we need a Lua developer, and you're like, I haven't touched Lua since I went to NBC. But you can say, yeah, I know Lua, I've touched Lua, and then you have however long to kind of crash course for Lua. So yeah, that's how that's gonna work. So agile is kind of the big one right now, and it has been for a while. People are starting to see it crack, and that's where you see a lot of scrums and things like that. So um, that being said, if you require things to be like super flexible, but you also want it to be super speedy, agile is probably going to be the one. So basically, when it comes to agile, you have milestones, which are the major points. So um, sometimes it's as big as alpha beta release, those being your milestones. Sometimes it's as small as level 1, level 2, level 3. Sometimes it's even smaller. And then the milestones themselves are broken down into sprints, which are kind of like mini goals. And what that says, and generally they're about 2 weeks, often it's 2 weeks, and it's broken down and it's like says, hey, in this 2 weeks, you need to deliver all of these tasks. And generally they're prioritized, but sometimes it's just a giant list, and it's like, as long as you complete these in 2 weeks, then we can move to the next things. And generally, the biggest things with sprints is that Sprint 2 requires Sprint 1 to be done for everything in Sprint 2 to be done. So Sprint 3 requires everything in Sprint 2, which requires everything in Sprint 1. And so it just builds on each other. And I know that seems probably pretty logical, but this was like revolutionary when it came out. Like, nobody had thought of it. I don't know how, but I think somebody finally just like slapped a name on it, and things were good. And it's used for a lot of smaller indie teams, but you're gonna see a lot of like bigger companies are trying to get it to work with their companies, or work in their departments. Maybe not overall, but work in their departments specifically. It's definitely best when you trust the people that are putting assets in, and you don't have to worry about having heavy asset control. So sometimes agile is not the best for game sim, because it's a mixed bag. Sometimes you have really great artists that you do not have to have somebody who is in asset control for. And if you don't know what I'm saying about asset control, and those of you who are in game sim, or those of you who are getting ready to take game sim, you should have somebody who's in charge of asset control. I don't care how good your artists are, you need somebody who is going to say, open up whatever asset they have, make sure that it's following whatever your polygon count is, make sure that it's, zeroed out and all that jazz, make sure that it looks good, make sure that it's scaled correctly to your engine. That's what I mean by asset control. Asset control is the person that makes sure that the asset is ready to actually go into the game engine. And it will save you heartache if you have somebody who checks things before they go in. Because sometimes your best artists don't always pay attention to everything they should. Or they don't always freeze all the transformations. Or they don't always, actually name things correctly. Or they don't put the textures in. Or they don't pull a connection out or something like that. And it can make for some hilarious bugs. But it can also make for some really awful times. Hold on, let me see code. We have one from when we worked on. So the group that I'm with, we kind of met inside of. We met because of GameSim. So these are all people that I networked with, but so because our character artist forgot to freeze some transformations and things, this happened. And this doesn't even show you the most extreme. What started happening was when she started falling through the world, because of, I don't 100% remember what the issue was, but it had to do with the fact that things weren't frozen, things weren't what they were supposed to be. All of her limbs started like stretching infinitely. Her body started, that point right there started staying exactly where it was, and every limb started stretching further and further and further and further and further. And yeah, if we'd had somebody who did asset control, that would have been fixed. I don't think we have the other one. So one of the other issues that we had was that the person who did, we had a bunny character, and the person who modeled that didn't look at our scale, because that year they decided to use 3ds Max instead of Maya. Maya's easier to use like scale wise with Unity, and they made the bunny like 900 times bigger than anything else, so you put the bunny in the scene and the entire scene was inside the bunny. It was, yeah, it was a thing. It was a thing. So asset control really helps with that kind of stuff. Yeah, asset control really helps with that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Yeah, and then team is self-motivated. I know that's also one of those, you're like, well, everything should work that way. But because of the way that Scrums and the way that Agile works, a lot of things it's just like, okay guys, you have these tasks to do, get them done in 2 weeks, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Sometimes you have daily stand-ups, sometimes you have weekly stand-ups, sometimes you don't. So you're trusting that everybody's going to get their tasks done in 2 weeks. So kind of the traditional method is that you assess the tasks required, you make a list of all the things. So this is kind of closer to what Trello looks like. Trello can still be considered agile, but traditional is just kind of, it makes sense. You make a task list, you say, hey, you do this, you do this, you do this, and you split, and life is good. So this one is definitely not something that you see in larger companies anymore, because it doesn't work because nobody talks to each other. It's when you don't need to talk with each other, it's when you don't need to depend on each other for things, which is kind of weird in game development because pretty much everything has to go through a pipeline where, the programmers need the art need the programmers, the production people need all the art and the programming so that they can make beautiful things. It's a vicious cycle. So, yeah. Waterfall. Waterfall is one of those ones that, we don't hear about Waterfall as much anymore. And that's because it's basically traditional. It's basically the same as traditional. It's just a trickle down, because it's this idea that you have to wait for the other person to finish this one task so you can do this other task, and it just keeps going and going and going. But it's really great because it has this ability to make sure that the team size can grow, because since you're like water shutting down, it means that, once this one person's working fast enough and giving the next person a lot of tasks, that means that maybe you can hire or change up the order so that you have another person catching more of that watershed. But you have to really, really watch your timelines for that one, because sometimes you end up with a kink because, and I mean like in a hose. So, you end up where everything is kind of pooled in one area, and like there's so much work in this one thing, so the water flow has stopped going down to the next area that it needs to go to. And it's just kind of, it's just kind of up to you. And then adaptive. Adaptive is basically goes with the flow. The scope is variable, the budget, but the budget and time frames are fixed. And when I say scope, that means that, you don't really have a fixed idea of what this is going to be. But you know how much you can spend on it, and you know how much time you can spend on it. And like that's adaptive is literally just kind of loosey goosey, go with the flow. And they're not the funnest companies to work for, because they generally are like ridiculously fun companies. The problem is that they're generally the kind of fun companies that are like, everybody can take nap time whenever they want. But the problem is that everybody takes nap time and nobody does actual work. And they're like, that's cool, that's cool. Okay, guys, we've got like 2 more weeks on this 9-month project. Has anybody done anything? Okay, cool, let's try and get it done. And yeah, that's not my life. That's not what I want. Um, and then you've got critical path, which is rigid, step by step. It goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. It's sort tasks, critical, non-critical, and I know all of these sound pretty similar, and they really are. But people have made a bunch of money to say, "Hey, yeah, I named this thing." So, as production people, um, figure out a new way to just restate these steps and call it something, and you too may make money. Um, yeah, critical path, rigid step by step, critical, non critical tasks, do the stuff. But that being said, critical path is generally like a science thing. It's kind of like, let's follow each of these steps rigidly and get from our hypothesis to our end goal. And then there's a bunch of other ones. Scrum is agile based. That's why when I said Scrum, because you have Scrums inside of Agile, but you also have Scrum, which is Agile based. Yeah. They kind of bleed in and out of each other. I'm just not going to talk about PERT and Rational Unified Process. If you want, feel free to read them. Scrum, again, it's basically sprints. It's basically teams. It's basically the same exact thing. So, and like I said, a lot of these sound super, super similar because they are, and somebody just named them. And I mean, the people who made Agile and the people who named Scrum and the people who named all these things, like, they sell massive amounts of money because what they do is they go to different companies and they give talks on, like, how you actually do this stuff, or how to best use Agile, and they sell books and they sell a manual that changes out every couple of years. As production people, you will be all over this stuff if you're going to be on the business side. If you're more like going to be on the art side or the programming side, maybe not as much. But yeah, so yeah, just note that lots of things exist, and they tend to get combined or messed up or changed depending on the company you're working for. Yeah. You've got iterative, you've got a few others, but these are kind of the main 9 of them that get talked about the most often. Or I guess 8 of them. Are there any questions on that? Okay, cool. I'm gonna call silence as y'all are either sleeping or there are no questions. No shame if you're taking a nap in the middle of this. So, we went a little bit over what scripting was last class. We're going to go a little bit further and maybe a little bit more in broad strokes this class, just to kind of remind you and to figure out why we're even talking about DOS scripting today. Yeah. So what is game scripting? Woo! So originally it's used for system applications such as batch processing, and it was done through the command line. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing today as far as talking about DOS. So, what's batch scripting? Batch processing and batch scripting, it's just basically processing massive amounts of things together. And sometimes that's like finding your directory list and printing it out to a text file. Sometimes that's doing arithmetic so that you can put bits in different places. And don't worry if none of that made sense to you, it's okay. So, but what is scripting really? So you may hear the terms programming, scripting, and coding all interchanged. Some people may get... It may be the hill that they stand on to die about whether scripting is coding, whether scripting is programming, whether coding is scripting. Generally, people are going to understand if you just say one or the other. It's just not a thing. But the thing to remember is that all scripting is coding, but not all coding is scripting. The reality, though, is that there's not really a concrete definition for scripting. I give an example. This is tech targets. So scripting is a form of programming that is usually interpreted rather than compiled. Again, if that doesn't make sense to you, that's okay. It's easier to write the code in a scripting language than in a compiled language. Scripting languages are slower because instructions are not handled solely by the basic instruction processor. Scripting languages allow rapid development and communicate easily with programs written in other languages. And we'll go over what exactly that means in the next couple of slides. So some big examples, you've got JavaScript, ASP, JSP, PHP, Perl, TCL, Python. 2 of those, maybe more, might make sense to you. Maybe things that you've already heard of before. I'd say you've probably heard JavaScript, you've probably heard Python. You may have heard Perl and PHP. The other ones, maybe not so much. Don't worry about it. There's lots of languages. If you can think of a language, if you can think of a word or a name, there's probably a language after it. Like Dylan is actually a programming language. So, there's Julia. Julia's actually a big one right now. But yeah, so if you feel like looking it up and laughing, it's pretty good bet that there's a programming language that's named after you, or you're named after a programming language, one or the other. So let's break down what this whole quote said. It's a coding language. It's meant to be easier to write in than, like, say, C++ or writing in assembly. Let me back up. Those that don't know what assembly is, when you think of how a computer communicates, you probably all understand that binary is kind of the bottom layer. It talks in ones and zeros. We've all seen the Matrix screen. I assume that's not a dated reference. Okay, so we all see ones and zeros. This idea that ones and zeros are at the bottom of everything. Well, ones and zeros don't translate directly to English. We need something that kind of assembles everything. So above binary, we have assembly language. And that gets into a whole bunch of kind of like weird changes, because you have base assembly, you have MASM, which is the modern assembly, you've got MASM 86, you have a bunch of different kind of assembly languages, but they just know that they all translate. They're like this baby step between things. And then you have on top of that your kind of meaty program languages like C++, which communicate directly, sometimes directly to the binary, but generally talk to the assembly language stuff. And then on top of that, sometimes a couple layers even further higher, you have your scripting languages, which talk to your base languages, which talk to your assembly, which talk to your, it goes down and down and down. So scripting languages are kind of like the top language, unless we're talking about markup languages like old school HTML, which are above those even, because those are even easier to kind of understand. They're faster to code because they're English, and because you're not having to write every little thing to get it to work with your system, because you've got that underlying like C++ going on. They're faster. But they are technically slower to run. That's because they have to be interpreted. So they have to take, they have to say, hey, I'm this language. And then it goes down to the next level, and C++ has to say, what is this language? Let me put it into what my C++ says. And then C++ has to go down and say, okay, assembly, this is what I mean in your language. And assembly's like, okay, so the stuff that was written in Lua was translated to C++. And then C++ added all of its stuff that it needs me to understand this Lua stuff. And now I'm going to translate it into assembly. And then now I'm going to translate that further down to binary so that the base computer understands. And then we're going to send whatever call we need back up to the top. And it's that kind of cycle. And many times you're not going to notice that it's slower. just because computers work so fast. Um, it used to be a bigger deal, like 30 years ago, before my time, sort of. I guess not really. Um, but it used to be a bigger deal. Like, you used to be able to see the difference. Now, not so much. So, and that's what I mean. It's interpreted rather than compiled. Compiled, it's directly into the system. Interpreted is when it has to be kind of recategorized or retranslated into another language for the base computer to understand. So, it communicates with something else, which is basically what all we just said. And it's generally the top layer on a more robust language, like C or C++, which we, again, have said. So, we talked about these last time, this idea of typeless and dynamic typing. And scripting languages can have both. And a lot of what we're going to be using is going to be typeless and dynamic, or dynamic and typeless. And again, you don't need to know what those mean. Just know that it means that basically typeless means that you can declare anything. So you can just say number Julia equals 45, and then further down the way you can say Julia equals Bobby, and it's not going to throw a fit. It means that you can overwrite variables regardless of type. So they tend to have simple and intuitive syntaxes, which is one of the reasons why we're going to start with Lua after DOS, is because Lua is the one that looks the closest to English and the closest to what you guys have pseudocoded. Which, by the way, y'all did pretty good on your pseudocode. I left some comments on people, so but they are all graded. Yeah. So, yeah. They tend to also have automatic memory management. C++ programmers, you'll either be super happy or super mad because you don't have any control over garbage management. So, for those that don't know what I'm talking about, because Java has memory management as well. When you're in C++, you never throw things away, or the program never throws things away for you. You have to, like, physically say, I am done with this, throw it away, open up that memory so that I can put new stuff in it. Whereas Java has memory management. Python has memory, like, basically, if it's a scripting language, it has memory management built in. Yeah. So, communication with other programs, so it kind of relies on something else to be able to, like, be understood. And then it tends to have an interactive shell. So, that's kind of, for creating your own language, you have to think about these things, especially a scripting language. Yeah, so advantages of scripting languages: you can make modifications without having to recompile the entire game engine or all the game code, because that takes forever and 6 years. But if you just need to do, like, one script needs to be changed, generally whatever you're writing in, so even if we're talking Unity, because I think most of y'all have had level design or are in level design, when you build an actual game, what Unity does is, if you've built it before, Unity looks and sees if anything has changed in any of the scripts. That's kind of what those meta files are for. And it says, hey, if it hasn't changed, then we can just keep it. We don't need to recompile it. We don't need to relook at it. Let's look at anything that's changed, and then let's change just that. So scripting makes things smarter. Again, they're easier to use and faster to learn because they're meant to be intuitive, they're meant to be closer to English, and the syntax is meant to be simpler. And it's meant to be... And I'm not going to say scripting's easy, and I'm not going to say that it's something that absolutely everybody understands, but it's definitely easier to look at a Lua script and be like, oh yeah, I understand what that's doing, than it is to, say, look at a C++ script and be like, haha, I know that that's a variable, because C++ can get pretty crazy, especially if you're looking at things that build actual game engines and things like that. For perspective, accessing the C++ coding inside of Unreal is a pain in the butt. You have to write at least like a page of code just to be able to start coding in C++ inside of Unreal. Whereas if you use the blueprint function in Unreal, it's like automatic. And that's the difference between scripting and actual coding. So, yeah. So, it tends to be portable for scripting languages. That's one of the reasons why what we're using is REPL.it, because it's a browser. Like, literally, that's how IDEs, like, that's how portable it is. There's lots of open source options. Those of you who like open source, you may like Atom, you may like, there's a bunch of other options, but Atom is the big one right now. So Atom is another, it's kind of an IDE where you can add all sorts of different language supports to it, and you just kind of add different things. So, yeah. And again, scripting languages have self-managed memory. So, disadvantages. It's slower than compiled code. Not that you're going to notice it, generally, but it is. Automatic memory management. Again, this is a good thing and a bad thing, because sometimes it will look at a variable or something that you haven't used in forever, and it's like, yeah, I don't think you're ever going to use that again, so it'll delete it. And so, like, 900 lines down, and you're like, yeah, I want to call this variable, and it's just like, that doesn't exist anymore, I don't know what you're talking about. And you're just like, what? So, you have to worry about that. Limited toolset, and that's just to say that sometimes it's easier, C++, you can do anything. Anything under the sun you can think of, you can do. Scripting languages, you can't, because you rely on C++ to do, or whatever other base language you're using. I'm sorry, I'm using C++ as the example because that's the one that I use the most often, but there are other base languages that exist. But yeah, so you're relying on other things. And then dynamic typing, again, it's such a wonderful, freeing thing, but if you've defined Julia equals 45 and done all this stuff and then switched Julia over to Bobby, Julia equals Bobby, and then forget that you did that, and then later down the line you're like, oh yeah, Julia equaled 45, so let me just add Julia to, I don't know, Billy Joe. And then suddenly there's an error because, well, Julia's now, whatever said Bobby, and Bobby and 32 don't add together, so it can get problematic. Scripts are also tend to be on a higher level. Because they're on a higher level, they're easier to get to, so they're easier to manipulate, so they're easier to manipulate, so it's easier to hack into those kinds of things. And I don't say hack as in like, ooh, we're hackers. It's just, break into, change a few variables. You probably have all done that without knowing that you've done it, where somebody's like, oh yeah, to get this game to actually work like it's supposed to, do this, this, and this. Or if you're using console commands in, say, Fallout to get unlimited bullets, or any other game. Those of y'all who are big Minecraft friends, or Minecraft fiends, I can talk. That's got all sorts of scripting in it. So, especially if you're doing the newer stuff. I wouldn't know, though. So I'm going to put this out here before anybody thinks differently. McDougal loves Minecraft. I am not a Minecraft fan. I understand its place, and I am awed by people's ability to use it and love it, but it's definitely not my thing. Yeah, so you guys, you go do you. And if you're generally anime fans, oh, Betrayal at House on the Hill is like one of my favorite board games of all time. Oh, so good. But if you guys are big Minecraft fans and you're missing anime conventions right now, they actually have a server set up that they built the HPG Convention Center. If you generally go to San Japan, which would have been this weekend, let me go find the thing for that, and I'll link you guys. I don't know if any of you guys are anime fans. I have no idea. that's, I guess, another thing about, I work San Japan. I'm their information desk lieutenant, second in command, however you want to call it. So, yeah. Oh, do I not have this one? So they're also doing a stream with San Japan Gaming. Where is my HBG thing? I will find this for you. Give me a few seconds. Like, I have no idea whether this is interesting to y'all or not, but, it looks really cool. So, copy image. Yeah. So, they built the HBG down to the carpets and everything, and it's pretty impressive. Like, I am very impressed. I'm always impressed by what I see that people did inside of Minecraft, but it is definitely not my thing. In the same way that Stardew Valley seems like one of the perfect games, but I've never been a Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley type of person, so those don't interest me. So yeah, and then one other big problem with scripting is that they don't always work in every engine. So, like, generally when you're talking base languages, you can get them to work in anything. But when you're talking about scripting languages, they don't always work, and they have slightly different, like, the script works a little bit different. So those of you who were in Unity or who are currently in level design or getting ready to be in level design, we use C# for that class. And C# looks great and relatively easy when you're looking at it in Unity. But if you were to go and do C# in something else, it's going to look completely different because it's all based off of the base libraries inside of Unity. So, scripting languages. ActionScript. ActionScript. And ActionScript has an ActionScript, ActionScript 2, ActionScript 3, and I think we may have ActionScript 4, but I'm not sure. And that used to be kind of the proprietary scripting language that was used with Flash, back when Flash was a thing, before Adobe killed it. Yeah. You can kind of make some good money right now knowing ActionScript because you can be translating Flash things into modern languages, HTML5 generally. ASP, Awk, ColdFusion, JavaScript, Lua, MaxScript, and Mel. If you guys are artists more than you are programmers and you like coding at least a little bit, if you like 3ds Max, I do highly suggest looking into learning some Max scripting. So MaxScript is the 3ds Max language that will help you, like, programmatically make things or change things or duplicate things, or it's helpful. And then Mel is the Maya version. Mel is modified Python. So Maya also has a Python compiler, so it'll let you do both. So Perl, PHP, Python, Ruby, TorqueScript, UnrealScript, VBScript. Yeah, so all of these. UnrealScript is not used in Unreal anymore, not really. UnrealScript is used proprietarily by companies to do things. TorqueScript's the same way, that it's a proprietary script. So these are like languages that a company actually built to use with their own stuff. So, game scripting. Of course, it can be added to a game engine, or it can be used to write an entire game. Like I said, many companies create their own proprietary scripts. Neverwinter Nights actually wrote their own, and it looks really cool. And then other companies use or modify existing open source languages to get things to work. So those of you who are big World of Warcraft fans, I know I have a few of you. That's actually, and maybe not the full game is written in Lua, but for sure if you're wanting to like make an add-on or they have actual names, but if you're wanting to make like a gizmo that, you know, is a tracker for rare spawns or any of those extra stuff that you download to like make your gaming experience better, those are all written in Lua, or written in something that gets translated to Lua. And then EVE Online is done with Python. So, yeah. They're pretty cool and pretty powerful. Okay. Any questions about that? Again, I'm going to assume silence is that you're sleeping or that you don't have any questions. Okay, so DOS scripting. What is it, and should you touch it? The answer is complicated. The answer is, if we were on the school computers, we would touch it more. Because if the school computers break, we've got an entire IT system that will fix it. Because you're at home on your own computers, I'm going to go through these, but I'm not going to have you touch it as much. In fact, you technically don't have to run anything. So, DOS, batch, command line, it's all the same thing. So, what is it? Why does it have so many names? It's run through your command prompt. That's really what you need to do. Old school programmers use the term DOS scripting, but we also see it as command line or batch scripting. It's taking a batch of commands and processing them through the command line. Like, that's what it all boils down to. I realize I should make this bigger for you guys, so if anybody's actually watching. So why are we learning it? Like, this doesn't sound like it has anything to do with game development, does it? It's not really game related. But it's in the curriculum and the course description, so I am legally obligated to teach it. That being said, it's a pretty decent reintroduction to code because it's also pretty close to English. It's incredibly powerful. So if you're liking this kind of stuff and you want to look at tutorials and things like that and find books, yeah. But it can also be the kind of incredibly powerful that it destroys your computer, like I said. So, and you end up accessing the command line via other programs, like all the time, without you even knowing what you're doing. It happens. It is powerful stuff because it can mess with your files and directories. You can delete entire partitions, entire portions of your hard drive, entire portions of your OS. There are technically no safeguards. That being said, newer versions, so Windows 10, which I'm sure most of you are running, has some safeguards on it, but even then, it's 100% doable to get around those safeguards and delete, like, your entire operating system. Yeah. And the big reason why is because it lets you modify files, you can change permissions, you can delete folders, you can do all of that through that. I am not going to show you, well, okay, I'm going to kind of show you, but I'm not going to show you how to do super dangerous stuff, and the only thing that you guys are going to have to do for me is to basically have something print on the screen. There is an extra credit assignment, which I switched over to extra credit, so that if you guys really want to try it out, you're more than welcome to. But again, last semester I did have one person brick a system. I don't know what they did, so that's my caveat right there. Are you going to learn dangerous things? Hopefully not. That being said, the internet has lots of sites that are like pranks for DOS scripts, and some of them don't harm your systems, and then some people think that the whole point of it being a prank is to prank you, and that the prank is that it kills your system and then you have to go get it expensively fixed. So just be aware that some scripts can actually do more harm than good. So, what are we going to learn? Hello World, naturally. For those of you who aren't programmers, generally Hello World is the very first program you write in any new language. And you will learn to hate it. And basically that's just so that you learn how to print things. We'll talk about variables, we'll talk about loops, we'll talk about checking if a file exists, we'll talk about adding a new file, math, because everybody loves math, getting user input, and I'm not actually going to talk about that. So I will show you a thing that has that, but so how do I do this? Windows key plus R will open up the command line, so I'm going to down this. So window key R, if you can see down here, it'll have that. Or you can do, if you're in your search bar, which I know you guys can see it through the stream, but maybe not in the recording, and you just type in command prompt will pop up. It's this box, which I'm sure you guys have seen before. Properties. Let's make this big enough so people can see it. Whoa. Okay, so yeah, so command prompt. It's this kind of thing. You may have seen it like pop up when you're installing things. You may have never touched it. Those of you who had to take networking courses have touched it. Those of you who have maybe wanted to check your ping or make sure that your internet was working have probably touched it. See if you have any call A, that kind of stuff. So that's what that is. So how do you write the scripts? There's got to be an IDE for that, right? Like there's a program we got to download, or we're going to use REPL.it. DOS is so old school, you write it in Notepad. Yep, Notepad. No, there is nothing that checks to see whether you've written something badly or not until you run the program. Nope, pretty much no IDE like Atom or things like that have anything that can check and make sure that your syntax is right. You're just flying by the seat of your pants. Yep. That's basically all that's saying. That being said, the one thing that you gotta remember to do, you don't save it as a .txt, which is automatically what Notepad does, and you don't save it as a bat. So pretty much every tutorial that you're gonna find, or a lot of the tutorials you're gonna find, are gonna save it as .bat files, which are batch files. .bat is buggy, and it has some memory mismanagement issues with newer versions. And your virus protection will hate .bats. Even if you wrote it, it will hate a .bat. It will be like so, yeah, it gets angry. So, but they don't mind .cmd, which is command. So you instead save it as a .cmd. Why? Because that's what works. Naming conventions. So this is going to be similar to everything that you've probably already seen with programming. Don't use spaces in names. If you've ever had programming professors that are like, or professors in general that are like, hey, you know, don't put a space in your name of your file. This is kind of why. Because it used to be that things couldn't understand spaces. Now they can, but it's still problematic. So, bad practice. Takes your computer more effort to register that space. So just, yeah. Pascal or camel case it, which are these guys. They're basically the same thing. Pascal is just a capital first letter. Camel is a lowercase first letter. I will never judge you on how you write your variables or how you write your naming of anything. You do you. As long as it all makes sense, I'm happy. Only certain characters can be read. So alphabetic letters, periods, and underscores. Numbers can sometimes be okay with DOS scripting, sometimes not. It's a little weird. Don't name things that could possibly already be a command or a program, like ping. Don't call a program ping.cmd. Maybe call it remote heartbeat instead. Don't call something goto, because that's also a keyword. There's keywords. So how do I run and edit a file? Find the file, double click it, it runs. How do you edit it? File, open, file. You gotta be in Notepad. So this one is gonna drive any of you that are coders like bat shit. I'm sorry. In modern programming languages, we think that this is good. This idea of adding a space so that it's easier to read. DOS scripting, however, does not like spaces, so everything must be not spaced. It will not read this one. It will read this one. It will not read this one. Capitalization, it doesn't care. So, that being said, I do suggest that anything that's like an actual command, so like echo or for or rem, and I'll explain what those are, I promise. I suggest capitalizing them only because it makes it easier for you to follow your own program down the line. There are no inline notations, so no semicolons for you to like mess up and forget to put. Normally. So, rem. I told you I was going to explain what this was. This is how you make a comment. It's just rem and then your comment. It stands for remark. It is the official way to do a comment. It is best boy. Nothing goes wrong when you use it. The one that super flashy people like to use is this double colon thing. The problem with the double colon is that it will produce errors if it's used in the same script as a for loop is used. So it's bad. It's trash. So it tricks the computer into thinking it's viewing a comment, but the reality is that it's not. So know it exists, but don't use it, please. Echo and echo off. This is your print line. You write echo and then whatever you want to write to have it print. But the command line is a parrot, so any line you put in your code, unless if you don't tell it to not like actually write that line out, it will write the lines out. So even if you're doing something that's like meant to be behind the veil, so maybe you're doing arithmetic or something, and you don't want it to see that you're doing arithmetic, you just want it to print out the sum. If echo is on, if you don't start your script off with this at echo off, then it'll print out every line, and it's annoying as all get out. But that being said, after you do this as your very first line, anytime you do want something to print, you write echo. So it lets you print to the console. It's like print line or cout or debug.log or any of those other that you use, or print, or any of those other that you use for whatever languages you guys are used to. Some other useful commands, and again, I'll walk you through actual scripts, so don't feel like you have to remember everything in one go. Go to is really, really fun. It's, okay, I say fun, but go to basically says, hey, I want to go back to this one thing when I get there. So in this kind of case, add echo off, so we don't want it to parrot. We say this little semicolon, or this little colon fish, this is our command, this is where we're going to end up going back to. So it doesn't really know what this is. So then we say, hey, we want to print this message out. This is the message that never ends unless you press Control C. And then afterwards it says go to fish. So it'll go back up to here and it'll just run this line and it'll just keep in a loop forever and ever and ever. So actually, I can show you that. On and on. So it's just looping and looping and looping, and then if I press Control C, it closes because it's done. So Control C is the universal close or quit for command prompt. And it's a very powerful set of keys. CLS will clear the command of all text, so if you've like put a bunch of text into it, yeah, you can clear it. Color will change the color, however, there's a very specific set of colors that you can actually use. Start will open things, so that is not the button I meant to press. So if you're wanting to like open a file, what I meant by this was a file directory. So this opens this folder right here, and it's a relatively easy script. So let me open Notepad and I'll show you. That's it. Echo off, start, folder. That's it. And then you can also do it with websites, and some programs are okay, like Start iTunes, that'll work. But it'll only work if like the directories are correct and stuff like that. So that one's not as easy to use. But Start, like this one, will work automatically. This one will work fine. Yeah. So stopping a program. So what if, say, we didn't want to stop the program, or we didn't want the program to close automatically? Also ignore this down here. If we didn't want the program to close like absolutely automatically, then we have to pause it, because basically the way that DOS scripting works is that once it's gone through what it needs to do, it closes automatically. However, we can pause it to stop it so that it like stays on the screen. So, I know we already talked about Control-C as the universal. So for Hello World is like incredibly easy. Hello World, just print Hello World, and I totally just closed Notepad, which I totally said I wasn't going to do. So Hello World, I could just rewrite this faster than I can find this. That's it. Echo off so that it doesn't parrot everything. Echo Hello World, so print Hello World, and then pause the screen so that it asks you to press a key to close. That's it. That's it. That's all you need to do for Hello World. So is there any questions about how to write Hello World? Let's go with that. Okay, silence is sleeping or no questions. So variables. I see typing. Oh, wait. So I'm going to suggest Notepad and not Notepad++, only because Notepad is going to be better. You can use WordPad, and it's just because you need a clean text file, and sometimes Notepad++ does weird things. Yeah. No. We will be using... So, we'll be using Notepad for all our scripting. Notepad will only be used for this one DOS scripting assignment. After that, we'll be switching over to repl.it, which is a website, which will have all of our IDs built into it. So... No, so the next question was echo function. Do you have to write echo to print some stuff, then type echo off to stop the echo each time? No. So once you have the @echo off at the very top, you can write echo, do whatever it needs to echo, and then write whatever else you're doing, and then echo again. @echo off is like a master turn off switch, so it's like, hey, turn all echoes off unless I tell you to echo. So, as long as you have that first line that says @echo off, you're good for the rest of the thing. So, with variables, undeclared is fine. Uninitialized variables are given the value of an empty string, because why not? Variables. So, to set a variable, to say, like, foo, which is your variable, is equal to bar, you use the word set. SET, set, foo, bar. Remember, don't space things out. I know for those of you who have been in programming classes where your professors were real sticklers about that, about spacing, this may be hard. That's why we're only doing one assignment with it. Set will overwrite any variables, so basically if you want to reassign a variable, that's what you can do that. That being said, if you want to print out a variable, you can't just say echo foo. Instead, you use our favorite little percentiles. So that's how you print out foo. So that, if you did echo that, it would print out bar. So that's kind of explaining the same thing. If you want to do arithmetic, you have to tell it by doing set, and then you add the /a, which is, hey, set and do arithmetic 4 equals 2 plus 2. So, again, I'm not going to ask you to do a lot of this stuff unless you're going to want to do the extra credit assignment. But I do need to show you that it exists. Arithmetic. So again, and all of these files are available inside of the files on, I think they're actually in your modules, but they're also available in the files on Canvas for you guys to look at. So don't feel like I'm just leaving you without anything. Okay, so what this says, remember echo, add echo off, so that's going to turn off our echo. Then remarks, so these are our comments. Variables are not required to be declared. If undeclared, the value is an empty string. Set is the command to assign a value to a variable. White space is bad. /a turns arithmetic operations on. So right here, we're saying, hey, create a variable named 4 and do arithmetic so that 2 plus 2, so 4, equals 4. So then we're going to echo 4 equals 2 plus 2. And then we're going to echo 4 equals the value that's stored inside the variable 4, which we know is actually 4. So then we pause it. And if we run it, sometimes this will happen. 4 equals 2 plus 2, 4 equals 4. And again, you can press any key and it'll close it. So that's the power of pause. So if statements. If statements work a lot like what you're used to in Java, C# or C++. If Boolean expression, parentheses, do this thing, else, do whatever. And the same way, you can have single line if statements. If 1 is equal to 1, then do the thing. So, and then it can be used in conjunction with exist or not exist, especially if you're trying to find if a file exists. So if press. So this is a little bit different than the one that you guys are going to have inside of Canvas, because this was one that I fixed up later on. And yeah, so what this says, add echo off, remember we always do that first. Remark, so our comment, we turned echo off. So we're going to set our first variable to high. We're going to set our second variable to buy. So we've got this guy right here, this little fish thing. So we know we're going to want to use a go to somewhere because we've got that little colon. So echo, press 1 plus enter or return to say hi. Press 2 plus enter or return to say bye. So /p waits for the person on the other end to answer. So then we're going to set a variable called u to whatever our user input is. If the input equals 1, like we've asked them to do, then echo variable 1, so hi. If it has equaled hi, that means that they haven't said bye, so we want to go back up to this top and ask them to print again and say hi or bye again. If you, so if whatever they've put input equals 2, they've said bye. And that means that the program can just finish. So press 1 to say hi, and enter, 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 enter. And as soon as we press 2, we no longer have an option to do anything. That's a single line if statement. You could, of course, space it out if you wanted to, but for things like this, and for I think pretty much anything I would ask you guys to do, single lines are gonna work for you. And then if we're talking about, I keep closing the pad, finding a file, like I said, we can use it in conjunction with exists, and what did I call that? Find a file, find a file. So this is how you would do multi-line. It's the same thing, it's just, you know, more lines of code. So echo off. Echo, does myanswers.txt exist? And so basically, this will find if it exists in the directory that you're currently in. So because mine is on my desktop, it's going to look through everything I have on the outer layer of the desktop and see whether it finds a thing called myanswers.txt. If it finds it, it's going to say, yeah, found. If it doesn't find it, it's going to say, no, I didn't find it. So it's not found. You can press any key to continue. So to figure that out, or to like start adding a new file, I'm not going to close that. It's actually relatively easy. Output and input is how you do that. And basically, so a single little sideways caret, arrow, however you want to call it, will transfer. So directory to directory list.txt will create a directory list of your directory. If you want to append, so if you want to add like a second line of text, you have to use 2 of them. And then everyone after that, you just use 2. But the very first one's always 1, and then everything after that is 2. And we think of this as like this idea of like maybe you were wanting to do a question and answer, and so you have like a line, and you want to input that into a file. So you would do the single one, and then you would do another one. And if it doesn't exist, if the like directory list.txt doesn't exist, it'll create it for you the first time. It's like it doesn't care. It'll create it for you. Yeah, so taking from a file and displaying to the command line is the opposite way. Taking user input and adding it, yeah, it looks like that. So what that looks like is going to be create directory list. So rem turns echo off, rem this file creates a file, directory list.txt, rem this stores the directory file and a list called direct list. So all we need to do is we can create this one, run, created a list of files and folders in the current directory called list.txt. And then you can see it's right here. And look at that. It's all the things that are currently on my desktop. Tells you what's free, how many files there were. Any of these things that are marked as directory, that just means folder. And then these have to do with size and memory allocation. So, yeah. That's all that is. So ask a question though. Is going to be a little bit different. So basically what this is going to say is it's going to say, hey, because you always have to write this thing con if you're looking for user input to go to a txt file. So ask a question, afterwards press enter, then blah 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 blah. So it's going to do this kind of thing. So ask a question, afterwards press enter, then press Control Z. So the reason why we're using Control Z is how you stop input. So I can continue to write, so I can say, how are you? What are you? Is today Saturday? And you notice that it's still going and going and going. It's not telling me anything else until we press Control Z and then press enter, and then it closes out. Now again, we could have made that nicer where we put a pause so that it didn't just like abruptly close out. But you can see we have a file called my answer. And look, everything we wrote is now there. So that's how that works. And we've already talked about go-to. We did, that's the fish thing. So I'm not gonna like worry about that. And then if you guys want tutorials or something, there's an easy to follow. I like this guy's tutorials. And then these have some cool batch files. So some cool files for you to use that won't mess up your system. So with that said, the one thing that you guys are gonna do with batch scripting or with DOS scripting is gonna be this assignment right here. And you don't need to send me a picture of your program. That's fine if you don't want to run it because you're afraid that it's going to blow something up, and I don't blame you. If you just send me a screenshot, it doesn't even need to be your .txt file. Just send me a screenshot of this. And I know that seems really lame based on what we have talked about, because we talked about a lot. But I don't want to put your systems in jeopardy. I don't want it to be something that could possibly be problematic with your systems, so I'm not going to make you guys do anything that could be problematic. However, if you want to, there is an optional thing, and it has you printing stuff to a text file, and then doing some math. And it's 100% optional. It won't count against you. It won't count against you. So, with that said, oh yeah, so, did I not put that on my desktop? I had to put that on my desktop. How did I not put that on my desktop? Matrix calling. So, let's see. No? How was I playing this? What I did want to show you is that, yeah, you can actually do the matrix stuff pretty easily. And I'm assuming I'm being really blind and it's literally like right in front of me. There we go. So yeah, you can actually set up the whole matrix stuff. Yeah. And I give you guys the actual script for this. So if you wanted to look and see how they did that, you're more than welcome. Because no, I didn't actually program it. I just grabbed one because, yeah. So, with that said, are there any questions about DOS scripting other than why the heck did we have to go through all of that not to do anything? Okay, I'm taking silence as no questions or sleeping. We have one more PowerPoint to go through, and I will let you guys off the hook for the day. So, we're going to talk about what you need to worry about when you're learning any new engine, so game engine, or any new language. I guess I won't let you guys off the hook. I'll have one more thing or two more things to talk about, but they'll be really short because we're going to talk about assignments. If this will load. Okay, cool. So, when it comes to learning a new language, there's things to consider. And when it comes to learning a new engine, there are other things to consider. How does it handle object interactions? How does collision happen? Do you use raycasting? Do you use triggers? In general, we're going to use a lot of collisions. We're going to use some triggers, but more than anything, we're going to use collisions. How is space set up? Global versus local, X, Y, and Z axis. What or where is the origin? Those of you guys who have taken level design should know that Unity's origin is at the bottom left corner. So that's where 0, 0 is, and then it works its way up to the top right. In a lot of the programs that we're going to use, it's going to be flipped. It's going to be in the top left and go down to the bottom right. So it's something, yeah, because when you want something to move in one direction, you need to move in the correct direction. So just that's something to think about. How does physics work? Does your engine even have physics? How does instantiation work? Instantiation is creation on a dime. So it's how do you make something out of nothing? Does it have AI? Does it have machine learning? Does it have environmentals? How do you program or add in GUI or UI? Is it pixel based? Is it vector based? So we also think of that as raster versus vector. What are the resolutions that it supports? Because sometimes you can have fantasy consoles or old school emulator consoles like Pika and Tico 8 that are meant to emulate really tiny like Game Boy screens, so they only hold a certain amount of things. Actually, one of the Python options that you guys have is an emulator that only holds a certain size and it only holds a certain colors because it works off of like a 16-bit kind of thing. So, speaking of colors, what colors does it support? Does it support all RGB? Does it only support CMYK colors? That's not as often a thing, because generally we think of CMYK versus RGB as printing issues. But there are a few engines out there that work off of some bizarre sets of color schemes. How does it define a sprite? What is a sprite? And the most gamer question ever, what does the frame rate look like? Especially with older kind of systems, sometimes the frame rate is going to look choppy, and sometimes that's purposeful, and sometimes that's not. So these are all kind of questions that you need to think about, especially before you say, yeah, I'm going to build this kind of game in this kind of engine, you got to figure out whether the engine can actually do the things that you're wanting it to do. So the other thing, what traditional data types are used? So some engines, even though they're written in, say, Python or Lua, which support all sorts of different kinds of things, some engines may actually say, hey, yeah, no, we don't like that, so we're no longer going to support, so maybe they don't support floats. They only support numbers. So they've made their own version. Do they have any new types of data types? So when it comes to Unity, you have things like vectors and quaternions and all sorts of new things. Game object. Like, these are data types that you don't see in the normal language of C#. but you do because Unity has given it these extra data types to use. So how do functions, classes, and structs work? And those are functions and classes, those are the meat and bones of your programs. And then structs, you don't need to worry too much about that, but that has to do with kind of variables that in and of themselves have defined their own sets of classes and functions. Which is oversimplified, and I'm sure somebody in this room is screaming at me for just saying that, but it's not something that you really need to worry about as production people. You just need to kind of especially ask those kinds of questions. And concatenation. Concatenation is a huge deal. So concatenation means combining two strings together. So that's when you say, like, add this string to the end of this string. Some languages let you do that in one variable. So some say that strings are what we call mutable, which means that they can be changed. Some languages say that strings are immutable, so they can't be changed. So for some languages and some engines, 100% it's going to be like variable A plus variable B. So variable A equals variable A plus variable B. And it's going to be happy with that because you can change a string. Others will say, nah, you can't do that. So you have to create a new variable called variable C to hold variable A plus variable C, or B. So sometimes the immutability of strings is like a big issue. So concatenation is the easiest way to look and see whether a string is immutable or not. And again, we'll go over this further when we get into Lua and when we get into Python. So I'm hoping that this isn't like feeling super overwhelming. I'm hoping. Because I can't see anybody, I don't know. I'm under the assumption that half of you are sleeping, so I know I would be. Nobody's watching me. I'd be sleeping or like eating breakfast. Yeah. So how does a game render? And this is a super big one. You have things called blitz and screen flips and double buffering. These are things that you never think of inside of Unity or inside of Unreal. But inside of old school kind of engines or engines that are less have like the stuff not as hidden, because Unity does this stuff, but you just don't ever have to control it yourself. But older engines, less sophisticated engines, you have to tell it, I need you to go from frame 1 to frame 2, and you have to tell it how. And that's basically all this stuff means: blitz, screen flips, and double buffering. And it just has to do the way that it transfers. You can read the rest of this. I will let you if you want to, if this is interesting to you, but all you need to know is that this stuff is talking about how do you get from frame 1 to frame 2. So basic questions for a new language is syntax and formatting. Is white space okay? In Java and C++, you get taught, the more white space, the better you are. In Python, however, Python will get mad at you for not spacing correctly. You add one extra space somewhere, and your entire thing throws a compiler error. It is the most frustrating thing out of Python ever. Yeah. End-of-line operators, semicolons. So those of you who are used to Java and C++, you know, if you've ended your statement, if it's an end of a line, you need a semicolon. Python and Lua would beg to differ. Both of them are sort of okay with using semicolons, sort of, but both of them are like, nah. So depending on the language, also depends on how you comment. Again, if you're used to C++, Java, you're used to kind of these double guys. We just looked at rem, but there's all sorts of others. Asterisk marks, plus signs, different languages use different versions for how they comment. And that's super important because commenting makes your life easier.
Like, it really does. Variables. What types of variables can you use? Are they typeless? Are they dynamic? Again, are strings immutable or mutable? All that jazz. Does your language support arrays? Does it support lists? Does it have dictionaries? Lists and dictionaries are just different versions of arrays. Again, sort of. But does it support advanced data structures? That's the question. For those of you who aren't so program savvy, those may be weird words. For those who are program savvy, yeah, it's a huge question. And then it's a huge question as to how the operators work. Does it have a modulus operator? Does it have a, do you use double equal signs? Does it have a not operator, or does it say the word not instead of just the exclamation point? How do loops and conditionals work? Are you using an if-else statement? Are you using an if-then-else statement? Do you have a do-while loop? Do you only have a while loop? Like, all sorts of questions. How do functions get created? Do you have classes? Are you only using functions? What are the return values? Do you have to have return values? And again, these are all questions to think about, but 100% if this doesn't make sense to you, it's okay. Because we will walk through how Lua does it, we will walk through how Python does it, and you'll start understanding how these questions are important. So scope. Scope is, is a variable public to everybody? Is it only public, or is it only good to its local scope? Is it good to global scope? Like, how does that work? Privacies. So can this script communicate with this script that can communicate with this script, or are they all shut up and can never communicate with each other? Are things case sensitive? For some languages, capital letters don't matter. For some languages, they do matter. And you gotta figure out whether the language you're using is one of those. So the idea that string lowercase is the name of the variable, so the name of the data type, whereas string capitalized is the name of the class. They're two different things. Yeah. How do classes work? What kind of classes do they have? What kind of libraries do you need for this language to actually work? What is the IDE, the SDK, the editor? How do you actually write this stuff? So again, for us, we're going to be using REPL.it because it's got Love, which is our Lua engine, and Lua, and Python, as well as Pygame and Pixel support, which are the two engines that you guys will get to choose from for Python. And then what kind of reference material does it have? Because nothing sucks more than a language that has the absolute worst reference material, or doesn't have reference material at all and leaves you to die in the wind. Actually, one of the engines I'll show you. One of the engines that we're going to use, or that you will have an option to use, their documentation is one page, basically. It's a GitHub thing, but it's basically, this is their documentation. This is what they think, this is all you need to know. That's it. That's all you need to know to be able to do their thing. That being said, they've got examples and things like that, but Pixel is incredibly simple to use, so this is all they have. Versus if you've ever been to like the Unity documentation website, it's crazy. No. You'll be able to use GitHub if you want to use it, but otherwise you won't have to use it. Yeah. Like, everything that we're doing will be through REPL. This is just their engine. So, like I said, we'll be using REPL, which is REPL.it. And you don't have to pay for it. Don't worry about it. That's just their, like, please support us because we're awesome. Because they are. But this will be basically, and you can hook this up with your GitHub for more space. Otherwise, you have a limited amount of space. But basically, this will, like, it'll let you completely program inside of your browser. So, and it will let you put images and everything inside of it. So as long as you're not, like, being overzealous about the images that you're putting in, you can store everything inside of REPL without a problem. So, this is just because this is how they host their thing. But literally, you would never have to touch GitHub to use it. It's all inside of REPL already for you. So yeah. So, that's a big thing. Reference material is a big issue. Like, does it actually, does it exist? Can you use it? Functions, again, how do you create them? How do you pass the parameters, the return values, and the syntax? Okay, so are there any questions about that? Okay, cool. The 2 assignments, so yeah, we're basically done for today. I know this class has been really short, the first day and today. The reality is that I try to give you guys a lot of lab time, and since you're not doing labs, not really yet, it's shorter than it should be, and generally there's a lot more of us talking and a lot more of us doing things because we're in a classroom. So this class is often going to be a little bit shorter than it is. Like, we will never go overtime. I'll go with that. We will never go overtime. So for your assignments, you're going to look at engines. So by now, everybody knows Unity and Unreal. I want you to find 2 engines that are not Unity or Unreal and write 100 words on each of them explaining what they are, how they work, and whether it's an engine that you think could actually be useful to you. Now, if you go to the first week, the modules, I have a list. I would prefer that you maybe find something that's not on this list. But if you want to, go ahead and use something off of this list. Because there are so many engines out there, it's not even funny. So yeah. It's kind of up to you. And then the other one is you have a reading, which is Brian Hook. This is your first kind of... You have an option. You can either do the reading or you can do the programming, if you guys like programming. Please note, I want it to print out exactly like this. Last year I had everybody who turned it in, couldn't get it to print out so that it was centered like that, and they're like, it's good enough. No, it's not. It needs to print out exactly like that. It is not hard to do. I mean, maybe it is. I did it. It's not hard to do. So you have the option. You can read this, which is What is Game Scripting? It's a PDF. And then you need to reply to one other person. And if you do the programming, you still have to respond to one other person. So you want it to print out in this diamond shape. And all it is, you're using the Fibonacci sequence, which I give you. It's this thing. And you can look up how the Fibonacci sequence works. I want you to use the equation. I want you to use the equation. I don't want you to print out, yeah, let me just do the numbers. Because the whole point should be that it could be scaled, bigger or smaller. Because right now I want you to print out the first 15. But maybe later on I wanted you to print out the first 30. So it should be easily scaled without you having to look up a chart of what the Fibonacci sequence is. Along with that, you have 2 assignments that are from the first week that are still due, which is your pseudocode for your guessing game and your pseudocode for your thermostat. And those will be due next week. And the reason why they're going to be due next week is because next week we're going to start looking at Lua. And we're going to talk about your pseudocode, and you're going to take some of your pseudocode and switch it over to Lua. And then for homework, you'll take your guessing game and switch it over to Lua. So, are there any questions? Okay, any wants, desires, dreams, hopes that I can help with? I'll take silence as a no. And that's going to be it for today. Okay. Okay, so that's going to be it for today. Again, some of these classes are going to be a lot shorter than, they normally would because, again, I'm used to being in a classroom where there's a lot more interaction and a lot more, because this is a morning class, it always involves me bringing breakfast, so it's us eating and waiting for the one person who managed to not wake up, so we're sitting around until 10 anyways. So yeah. So remember that you do have a quiz. Do your quiz. And I will see all of you next week. Yeah, next week. That is a thing.